Fair? All right. The goal is to, I'll try to get through this first part as quickly as I can so we get to the Q&A because that's the fun stuff, right? So first, my name is Mr. Eichwald, so let's say Trevor here, I pointed to you, come on. So let's say Trevor Paulus, right? Okay, got it right. Let's say Trevor Paulus, you're a biologist, okay? Just work with me, all right? Trevor Novak, you're a chemist, all right? Michael Hickman, I want you to be a psychologist, all right? And finally, we've got our priest, pastor, and shepherd, Father Wiss, at the back, okay?
Oh,
so, that's what we're doing. I know some of you just like fainted. Okay, so that's what we're going to work with today. So you got it? So we got biologist, chemist, psychologist, and priest, right? All right, so Dr. Paulus, right? As a biologist, I would like you to explain Mr. Eichwald. Explain what you see here, right?
I see a human being.
You see a human being. A little bit more detail, please.
With blonde hair.
Okay, so you see certain physical characteristics. Do you know my species? Anybody help them out? Homo sapiens, very good. Okay, so that's my species. Now you might analyze my genome, right? You find that I'm genetically very similar to other organisms, right? 98% of me is the same as a chimpanzee, right? You might know that. You might know that the majority of me is actually identical to a banana genetically, right? So you would look at my genome, you'd classify me, you'd look at my relation to other organisms, right? Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Anybody want to add or take away anything there? Biologists explain that's kind of what they would focus on, right? Okay. Now, Dr. Novak, as a chemist, how would you explain what you see here? Okay, you'd look at the molecules. You'd be like, this is a carbon-based life form. We've got all sorts of chemical interactions going on, right? Get ready for one of them. My favorite chemical interaction of the day. Right? All of a sudden, you've all seen the memes where caffeine goes out, magic happens, and energy comes out. That's kind of what happens. So you focus on the chemical interactions, right? You focus on me as a chemical phenomenon. Is that fair to say? Right. Would anybody expect anything different of him as a chemist? If we want his expert opinion, that's what he's going to talk about. Dr. Hickman back there is a psychologist. Now, Michael, I promise you, I'm not going to hold anything you say against you. All right? Psychologically, what do you see here?
Pretty good guy. Right there.
Well, thank you. I'll pay you later. But you would talk about my psychological state, right?
That's right.
You would talk about, you might ask me, like, have you been having those dreams again, Mr. Eichwald? Are the voices still talking to you?
Perhaps.
I'm joking, but you would be interested in sort of the state of my mind, right? So, would you deny anything told to you by the biologist?
No.
You would deny that I'm a Homo sapiens mammal, right? Would you deny that I'm a amazingly complex ball of molecules? No. You would just kind of explain it from a different perspective, talking about my ideas, my emotions, things like that, right?
Yeah.
Mr. Eichwald takes NWA out on us because of this trauma from his childhood, right?
That was pretty accurate.
Not true. Normally I expect laughs on that, but when they don't laugh, I get worried. Like, am I doing something wrong in the testing? Yeah, that makes sense. Must not have loved his job. Anyway, so now I come to Father Wiss back there. All right, Monsignor Wiss. He's been a good priest for a long time. I would ask you about Eichwald, right? What would you be interested in?
Maybe the relationship.
What relationship? My relationship with coffee? We already addressed that chemically.
Definitely.
My relationship with my psychologist?
No. Yeah.
My relationship with God, very good. So you would see that Mr. Eichwald, there are sins, but then there's good stuff, and this constant struggle that we all have, right? That's the sort of stuff you would be interested in, right? So you'd be looking at my soul's relationship with God. Now let me ask you, all right? Who do I want to pick on here? Let's pick on Mr. Crescione over there, right? Now, Mr. Crescione, you're trying to understand all that is Mr. Eichwald, right? Whose testimony are you going to listen to?
All of it.
All of them. Now, let's say that I've got a biologist telling me a fact about Eichwald, so I don't need the chemist, or I don't need the psychologist, or I don't need the priest. What are we missing if we do that?
Other people's opinions or other facts about what makes perspectives on what makes up you, I guess.
Right. So in other words, the more different perspectives you have, the better understanding you get of the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
The same would be true of, let's say, the soccer game last night. All right? If I were to ask, Coach Mike Devane, by the way, Chaminade's varsity coach, was watching the game. If I were to ask him about the game as an expert coach, what sorts of things do you think he'd focus on in explaining the game?
Possibly make us better than them.
Coaching adjustments, he would look at that. Let's say I got the head of mission officials sitting next to me. What sort of things is he going to tell me about? Anybody? I got the head of the refs union sitting right next to me. I asked him to describe the game. What's he going to tell me about?
How the refs are.
How the refs are, right? I've got a meteorologist sitting next to me at Vianney last night telling me about the game. What's he going to focus on? The weather, right? I got a former player talking about that little subtle thing that he did that nobody really notices, but that was excellent. So if I want to really understand the game, should I listen to all those perspectives? Do I have to choose one? No. So here you study physics, chemistry, and biology. Do we have to pick one? Is one like the more real explanation of nature rather than the other? Do I have to pick? No. They all give us a better understanding of reality. And so does religion. That's the key. Okay? So biology can explain certain things about me. For example, biology can explain a natural process by which a body like this, a genetic code like this, chemical interactions like this emerged. But biology can explain what makes Mr. Eichwald happy and fulfilled. Biology cannot explain Mr. Eichwald's relationship with God. Any biologist who says that because I have a biological understanding, I know that priest must be wrong because he said different things for me is missing the point. So what is evolutionary biology? Evolutionary biology is a wonderful explanation of how the many different life forms we have today emerged. Have you guys do you guys do comparative embryology? Do those words mean anything to anybody?
They know what embryos are. I mean, we
Okay.
looked at them.
All right, so are they going to?
Compare them now.
Okay. If you were to look at like the early stages of cell development, so as you know, you started off as an embryo, right? Then you get the zygote, then eventually you form into a fetus, right? That it's got little hands and all that, and then you turn into a baby, right? But if you were to look at the really early stages of that development, anybody ever looked at these pictures? You know where I'm going with this?
They've seen it.
What do you look exactly like in those real early stages?
Everything else.
Pretty much everything else that develops at that stage. Like you and an elephant at that stage, real hard to tell apart. You and an elephant now, much easier to tell apart. Okay? Anybody ever look at the bone structure of a hand? Anybody ever broken their hand, got an x-ray?
Yeah.
Right? If you were to take an x-ray of a whale's fin, what would you see? Now we're pretty different from whales, aren't we? It's basically the same. Bones are elongated, shaped a little bit differently. The thumb's not opposable. It's kind of alongside the others, but it's the same basic bone structure. Evolutionary biology provides us a great explanation of all of these things. The problem is not in saying that evolution can explain those things. It does, and it does so wonderfully. The problem is in saying that because evolutionary biology explains those things, it must be able to explain everything. That's the problem. Because that soccer coach knows a lot about coaching soccer, he must know a lot about cooking too. Well, maybe he does, but that's beside the point. So do you see how a theory that explains certain aspects of me, namely the physical makeup, the bone structure, the genetic code, it's wonderful. It's great. And by the way, every pope since Pius XII in the middle part of the 20th century has accepted some form of evolution as probably true. Right? It goes back to a document called Humani Generis by Paul VI, which I'd encourage you to read if your interest is piqued, go back and read it. So to believe that evolution explains a wonderful variety of things in the universe is no problem at all. But to think that because of that it can explain everything would be false. Okay? That's like explaining that because I don't see Mr. Genovese in this room, there must be no Genovese. See what I'm saying? So, I'm not saying that evolution is wrong. I'm saying that evolution is a wonderful theory that explains certain things. We shouldn't expect it to then explain everything. Okay? So that's kind of my spiel. Some of the questions you guys asked I thought were awesome. Okay? So I want to deal with a few of these. One that I think is a good place to start is like, so some religious people clearly have a problem with evolution. Okay, so where does that come from? It sounds pretty simple when I explain, oh yeah, there's no problem, it's all great. But why do people think there's a problem? A lot of times the issue is in the way we look at those early chapters of Genesis, okay? The Bible is not, it has the unity of a book, but it's not really just a book, okay? It's closer to a library than a book. How many of you ever walked into a bookstore? I used to use this as an example, then I realized that like nobody goes to bookstores. Anybody ever walked into a bookstore? Ever been in a bookstore? Okay, some of you, right? Some of you can tell about the experience to those who've not had the pleasure. You go into a bookstore, you see different signs all over the place. What do some of those signs say? Anybody raise their hand and tell me what a sign says? You got fiction, inspirational, historical, history, cookbooks, how-to guides, things like that. So I'm walking around a bookstore, okay? And I see a cookbook. And I see a cookbook right next to a novel. How and why do we read a novel? Joe Phelps, what do you think? Like, how would I read a novel? Like, what's a novel for? It's for fun, it's for entertainment, right? So, do I read like one page and then I read a page later? Like, do I just sit down and say, I'm going to read page 82 today? And then just, no. I'd read it cover to cover and take it for what it is. What about a cookbook? Is it meant to be read that way? No, you look at one page when you need it. I see science textbooks on that shelf back there. Would I pick up a science textbook and read it the same way as I would read Of Mice and Men? Now, Of Mice and Men, I don't want to spoil the surprise if you come here freshman year, you read Of Mice and Men. It's a great book, right? Cover your ears at some point, there might be some spoilers involved, right? So, I'll try to do it without spoilers. So, George